Hey guys, how's it going? Taki here. Got another build guide for you guys. This is gonna be for my Exsanguinate Gladiator, which has been my league starter for Expedition League. It's a really solid all-round character with really good clear speed and great defenses with max block, a good amount of armor and HP. I think it could even possibly be hardcore viable with some tweaks if that's something you want to try. As far as bossing goes, the DPS is a bit low, which I guess is something a lot of builds suffer from in this patch, but it's still able to do all the bosses necessary to progress the Atlas, like Conquerors and some Maven stuff, and I've also done Awakener 8 on it as well. At the start of the league, I actually leveled as melee through the acts and early mapping, because as a duelist you don't get Exsanguinate from quest rewards. And with Bladestorm getting a decent buff, I knew that was gonna be solid early on, so I played Bladestorm for a bit and then switched to Exsanguinate on day 3 of the league. So if you want a smooth leveling experience and you don't already have a high level character on Expedition League, I would recommend leveling as melee with Frostblades into Bladestorm, and then level Exsanguinate and Corrupting Fever in your weapon switch whenever you get them from Lily. And then when you feel ready to swap to Exsanguinate, probably in early maps like tier 4 or 5 or something like that, you can do that. Or if you already have a high level character on Expedition League, you can buy Exsanguinate on that one and mule it over to your duelist and start leveling with Exsanguinate from level 12. I'm gonna include both a melee and an Exsanguinate leveling tree in the path of building. Okay, so this is the character, Taki_XD. I'm currently level 95, and yeah, let's take a little bit of a look at the Ascendancy first. So, the biggest reason why you would want to go Gladiator is because of Versatile Combatant. Chance to block spell damage is equal to chance to block attack damage. That is really huge. It basically makes it so for every point of attack block you have, you also get spell block. So it's really easy to max out both your attack and spell block. You just get 75% attack block and you're capped in spell block as well. And yeah, before that we take Painforge, which is basically 80% chance to block attack damage if you were damaged by a hit recently. And then Versatile. Currently I have block cap with this up as well as Rumis. It's hard to get permanent block cap, but maybe with enough gear you could do it. And then on the other side of the Ascendancy, we have these two, Blood in the Eyes and Gratuitous Violence. So this one is like 10% more damage, basically. Enemies maimed by you take 10% increased physical damage. We're using Flesh and Stone, so nearby enemies are always maimed. And then for this one, 20% more physical damage over time. And as for the bleed stuff, we don't always apply bleed because Exsanguinate is a spell and only attacks can cause a bleeding, but we do get a little bit of bleeds on the enemies through whirling blades and reckoning. So when you whirl through a pack, because of Blood in the Eyes, we have 50% chance to cause bleeding. So if you whirl through a pack, some of the mobs are gonna start bleeding, and maybe you block an attack and you get a reckoning, and that's gonna apply some bleeds as well. So especially in like really dense maps and the more health the monsters have, basically you're gonna get more bleeding because like you play the Exsanguinate and then you whirl through the pack and then maybe you block and then yeah, maybe half the pack is bleeding and then you get some pops from the bleeds. And I mean, if the pack instantly dies from the Exsanguinate, it's gonna be harder to have time to whirl through it. But in like higher tier maps, you're gonna notice more explosions because you can apply the Exsanguinate, whirl through, and then they start bleeding, and then they die from the Exsanguinate, and you get the pops. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the Ascendancy. You get a little bit of a bonus from the explosions, but mostly it's 30% more damage and then all the block stuff. And for the rest of the tree, we basically start out here. We path on the side here because we don't get anything from attack physical damage. So I decided to save some points and go here, taking this one for a little bit of movement speed. And the attack speed and accuracy is actually kind of nice, because you want to be fast with your whirling blades, and you want to hit with your whirling blades because you want to apply bleeds and you want to get your fortify. So accuracy is actually not that bad, and dexterity is pretty big as well. Being on this side of the tree, we don't get a lot of dexterity and int, so yeah, you need to get a lot of dexterity and int from like your gear and the tree. Then we go up here through the Scion Life Wheel and to these nodes, which basically gives a bunch of fist damage over time, and fist damage, it's really good. And then a little bit of life per second here. Life per second is really useful because we use life as a resource. All our spells cost life except whirling blades. Then we take these skill effect duration nodes. Basically, Exsanguinate has an initial hit and then a debuff that causes damage over time. So the longer that debuff is, the more damage it's gonna do. Not more damage per second, but a longer debuff equals more damage per cast. And it actually is, the way it works is that it stacks up to 3 times on a target. So if you're fighting a boss, you want to keep 3 stacks up for as much uptime as possible. So skill effect duration helps with that. Then we go into the Marauder for a little bit of damage, life, and these block nodes that also give a little bit of resist. Again, you want to get close to 75% attack block. So you're gonna have to take a couple of block nodes probably to get that. And then we're going down to Soul of Steel and Bloodless. Basically just some defense. And then Cannibalistic Rite. Recover 2% of life on kill if you've spent life recently. And we're always spending life because Exsanguinate costs life. And then a little bit of more damage. Some life, jewel, life. Take these nodes for a bunch of damage. And going up here, reduced cost of skills is kind of nice because you don't want to spend a bunch of life. I guess it's just nicer to have a little smaller cost, and then some more block nodes with a little bit of resist. If you early on, you might want to take glancing blows for a little bit if you have like 30% block or something. But you don't really want to keep that because you want to. It's pretty easy to get like 75% block without it. So, and it does penalize you quite a bit. So yeah, and then we go up here for to the Templar for some life. I take this one because of the cast speed. Cast speed is really nice to make the build feel smooth because the cast time is kind of slow without any cast speed, and it just you feel kind of stuck in the animation a little bit. So you want to get a bit of cast speed to make the build feel smooth, and also to make it easier to like keep up 3 stacks on a boss. And then we take this jewel. You want to path through the strength here for this one because it gives damage over time per unallocated intelligence. So yeah, you go here, and then we have this cluster. You want to get one of these. Added small passives grant 12% increased physical damage. Like these small nodes are pretty good in and of themselves. 12% increased fist damage is pretty good. But then for the big ones, you want to get. I think you want to get at least Fierce Assault, definitely. Again, because of the attacks. Attack speed is fine. It gives us a little bit faster whirling blades, but the cast speed is really important. You want to get probably around like 20% increased cast speed on your gear and tree in order to make it feel smooth. And then for the other one, I have Iron Breaker. You can also get, I think, Master the Fundamentals or something like that. But yeah, just get high increased physical damage nodes on them. And then I just have some small ones here. Added small passives grant 1% chance to block attack damage. Yeah, you just more block, and rote reinforcement gives us a couple of endurance charges and 4% block and 20 max life. There's a bunch of good rolls you can get on these. On the other one I have one with the shield. It gives 5% chance to block, which is I think the highest you can get on these, and then recover some life when you block. So yeah, there's a lot of options on those ones, but I think these ones are pretty good. And I've anointed this one over here, Growth and Decay. It is really good for this build. It's definitely the one you want to be anointing. It does cost, it costs 1 golden, so it is a little bit expensive. You could also go for this one, Dirty Techniques. It's a little bit cheaper, but yeah, this one is really good. Increased damage over time multiplier, and life reg is also good for the build. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it for the passives. Okay, so let's now take a look at the gem links. Of course, I've got Exsanguinate with Control Destruction, Brutality, Efficacy, Shane, and Iron Will. I think most other Exsanguinate builds would use Cruelty instead of Iron Will, but I kind of like Iron Will for this one because we get so much strength from being on this side of the tree. It's similar damage and it's a lot more consistent because Cruelty, if you're fighting a mob with a lot of HP like Cyrus, it doesn't give us much damage, and yeah, I like Iron Will for this one. And yeah, for the rest of the supports, Shane is only used for clearing maps. So if you're fighting a boss, you switch in Swift Affliction for like 40% more damage. But in all other situations, you want to be using Shane. It's really amazing for clear speed. If possible, you should try to get Awakened Shane for that actually gives 3 Shanes, which is insane. That's gonna boost your clear speed by a lot, but unfortunately it costs like 9 exalts or something, so that's gonna cost more than the rest of the build combined. So that's something to aim for, but it's not needed. You still get really good clear with this. Efficacy is just more damage, and skill effect duration. Skill effect duration is really nice. Brutality, just more damage. Control Destruction, more damage. We don't care about crit at all, so Control Destruction is still very good for this build. And yeah, that's the Exsanguinate links, and then we have Corrupting Fever with Brutality and Efficacy. So the way Corrupting Fever works is it's a buff you get on yourself that applies corrupted blood, like the ones that mobs can apply to you. It stacks up to 10 times every time you hit the enemy. And it actually refreshes its duration every time you spend life, every time you spend 270 life. So that's pretty much every other time you cast Exsanguinate or something. It does cost a lot of life, but you only have to cast it like once per map, because it will just keep refreshing itself. And then we have Blood Rage. Same with that one, it just refreshes itself. It gives a little bit of attack speed for a whirling, and frenzy charges, which is really nice. And then we have Fortify in our whirling blades, along with faster attacks to move around and give us Fortify. And for the auras we have Pride and Flesh and Stone with Maim. So Maim basically gives the same effect as Blood in the Eyes, so we get 20% more damage from maiming enemies. So we really want to use that Flesh and Stone, and then Pride, just a bunch of more damage, and it gets a lot of levels from our gear, and using an Enlighten with that just to make it a little easier on the mana. The only thing we have that spends mana is Whirling Blades, but still. And then also have Vitality. The biggest reason we're using this is to get Leech, and we get that from this Watcher's Eye. And you could also use like a Doriani's Invitation with Fizz, but I think this is the best source of Leech. It also gives a little bit of life reg, which is nice, but you want to keep this on a low level. And then we have Reckoning with life gain on hit. Yeah, Reckoning is nice for bleeding the enemies and getting this life gain. So every time we block, this just happens automatically. And yeah, I guess that's it for the gems. Again, switch out Shane for Swift Affliction on bosses. And also you could use cruelty in maps, but I prefer just using Iron Will at all times. So for the gear, we're using Cold Iron Point as our weapon, plus 3 level of all physical spell skill gems, so that's Corrupting Fever and Exsanguinate, gives a bunch of damage. And then, yeah, for our shield, you just want to get physical spell skill gems and spell damage if you can, or cast speed. Again, cast speed doesn't help the DPS a lot, but it's really nice for like utility and quality of life. And it does help DPS a little bit as well. And then you want to get as much block as possible. This one has 29% chance to block with the roll. You could also get a Titanium Spirit Shield. I think that has like 1% higher base block. But yeah, you want to get high block on it. And then you can try to get resists if you need that. But yeah, then we have this ring. Just try to get resists and life. And the non-channeling skills have -7 total mana cost. This again is just for the whirling blades. It's not really necessary. You can pretty much sustain it without as well. Maybe you'll run out. Yeah, if you spam it, you could run out if you don't have it. But yeah, it's not really needed. You're not gonna spam it that much. It's just a little bit of quality of life. And then for the other ring, we have a vulnerability on hit ring. Vulnerability is gonna give a huge damage boost, so you want that. Again, dexterity and intelligence can be a little bit of a problem, so you want to try to get that on some of your jewelry. And for the amulet, we have an awakened amulet with warlord and hunters. You don't really need to get an awakener robe for this. You could just have either one of the rolls, and a good amulet on top of that is gonna be pretty much as good. It's just a little bit more damage. So if you can afford it, you can try to get this awakener orb rolls on it, but otherwise just get either one of them. Is good on its own. And then we have a Crown of the Inward Eye, just a bunch of life and a little bit of damage from the transfigurations with an Exsanguinate enchant. I have the duration enchant. I think it's pretty good. You can also get 40% more damage, or there's one enchant that gives an additional, it gives chance for an additional chain. I think you can get 50% chance for an additional chain. And that's gonna be better for clearing, but this one is better for bossing, I would say. And maybe the damage one. Yeah, the damage one is it's decent as well. And then for the gloves, we have Hunter gloves for fist damage over time multiplier. There's an Elder roll with the chance to block. You could get an Awakener orb and combine those. But yeah, it's not really necessary if you can get max block. Like, it's nice to have higher block at all times, but if you get max block with Painforged and Roomies up, I think that's fine. That's how my block is, at least. And yeah, then we have Cyclopean Coil. It gives a bunch of life. It helps with the attributes a little bit, as well as giving us cannot be ignited if strength is higher than dexterity, which it's always gonna be. So that's a nice kind of ailment immunity, and the same with Combs Roots. It makes you immune to freeze. Action speed cannot be modified below base value. It also helps versus like temp chains, and yeah, it also makes us so we can't be stunned. It gives unwavering stance, which is this one. Cannot evade enemy attacks and cannot be stunned, which is pretty nice. And yeah, I think that's it for the gear. So let's just take a little bit of a look at the flasks. I'm using a life flask with the... You want an instant life flask, and preferably something that removes corrupted blood and bleeding. I recommend getting it on a life flask. I think that's just the easiest way to have bleed immunity. Because like your first instinct when you get bleeded is to press your life flask. At least that's how I work. So you want to get that, and a Roomies. I'm using one of these. Is it the Instilling Orb? No, Enkindling Orb. I'm using an Enkindling Orb on it for more charges, but it gains no charges during flask effect. So that basically makes it better during boss fights, which is when it's most important, I think, at least. You can also get the duration one, but yeah, I like the charges. And then we have a Quartz Flask with poison immunity. And that's with an instilling orb. I don't press it a lot, I just let it happen whenever I get poisoned. But it's nice to have access to phasing so you can run through mobs if you need to. And also gives a little bit of dodge and for spells and attacks. And then we have a Quicksilver with increased cast speed. Cast speed isn't... Yeah, it's just a little bit more quality of life, I guess. And most of the time you will be whirling around, but you do a fair bit of running as well. And the opportunity cost for running a Quicksilver Flask isn't as high anymore as it was last patch. Because flasks are just worse than they were. So I think it's worth it just to run one for a little bit of quality of life and mobility. And then we also have a Silver Flask for Onslaught, which is more cast speed, movement speed, and attack speed, and with curse immunity. Yeah, you want to have some curse immunity for when you do get cursed by like a natural mob with hex font or something like that, but it doesn't work against with maps that have curses on them. But still, you do want curse immunity, poison immunity, and bleed immunity. But if you have Cyclopean Coil and Comes Roots, you already have freeze and ignite immunity, so that's pretty nice. And then for the Pantheons, I'm using this one, Soul of Aracali, for a little bit of reduced shock effect and duration. So I think we have really good defense towards elemental ailments, I would say. We're immune to 2 of them and have a little bit of mitigation towards shock as well. You could get shock immunity on a flask if you wanted to, instead of cast speed, I guess. So I'm running Aracali and Rislatha. We kind of depend a lot on life for our Exsanguinate, since it costs life. So you want to have a lot of recovery. That's why we have the leech. We have a lot of regeneration on our tree and so on. So having a life flask is important as well, and getting more charges is pretty important. Sometimes I use 2 life flasks on bosses. Like it depends. Sometimes I replace the quartz flask, sometimes the Quicksilver Flask. For example, on Cyrus you really want to be able to run fast, so on that one I replace the quartz flask. But yeah, you can replace either one of these 3 for another life flask on certain bosses, depending on which one, depending on the situation, more or less. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it for the guide. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to subscribe and leave a like, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one.